Janthe Wilds has launched, spears have been added to Guild Wars 2, and Condi Renegade is doing over 50k DPS. Why? I've been playing this game since the X-Pack launch, and it is the most fun that I've had on Revenant in a long time. Let's jump on this one quick while the going's good. Welcome back everyone. Condi Renegade is the new busted DPS build, so it's time for a crash course so we can experience the sheer power of it before ArenaNet realizes what they've done. No matter what though, the introduction of Spear with Janthe Wilds has given us an incredibly fun build that feels amazing to play, has a simple, easy to learn playstyle, and honestly has some amazing looking skills. So let's jump in quickly and cover this hilariously powerful build. First up, some Renegade basics. When you become a Renegade, you get access to the Karla Scorch Razor Legend, which lets you summon members of her warband with some nice AoE effects. After a balance patch earlier on in this year, the first Karla skill you use gives you the band together effect, which empowers the next one you use. So basically every second Karla skill you use is more powerful, which this plays out when it comes to your rotation. You also get access to Shortbow on Revenant, which with the Weapon Master system from Secrets of the Obscure, you can use on any Revenant spec. We won't be using it today, but it's a very fluid, high damaging, range condition damage weapon and one of my personal favorites. You also get access to new Citadel Order skills, which let you grant boons to your allies or deal some extra AoE damage. Another small but important mechanic is the buff Karla's Fervor. This is a stacking buff that grants you an extra 2% damage, condition damage, and lifesteal damage for each stack with a maximum of 5. Several of your Renegade skills and traits interact with this buff, so keep an eye out. With today's Condi Renegade, you'll end up with an amazing DPS build with lots of AoE cleave, a simple rotation, and oodles range damage. With that, let's dive into the gear. Our gear on Condi Renegade is going to be pretty standard in terms of condition damage builds. We'll be using full Viper's gear in every slot with Runes of the Trapper for the extra condition damage and duration. For your relic, you want to run Relic of the Fractal for the extra burning and torment whenever you apply bleeding. In terms of weapons, we'll be running a single spear with Sigil of Torment and Earth. The vast majority of your damage comes from torment, so you'll want to apply as much of this as possible. And the Sigil of Earth will let you keep applying bleeding for extra damage and proc Relic of the Fractal as well. You can run whatever weapon you want on swap. Shortbow is great for some extra CC while maintaining damage, and Staff is always a good choice for the insane CC on Surge of the Mists. Really though, you'll just be camping Spear the majority of the time, unless you desperately need to swap. For our food, run Meaty Asparagus Skewers for the extra torment duration and condition damage. Again, most of your damage comes from torment, so we'll be juicing it as much as possible. For utility, run Toxic Focusing Crystals. Now the core idea behind Spear is using your Spear 5 Abyssal Rays as much as possible, which 1 inflicts torment and 2 gives you stacks of Crushing Abyss, which will make your Spear 5 deal even more torment for each stack, up to a maximum of 3 stacks. So you want to reach 3 stacks of Crushing Abyss as fast as possible. Landing any of your other Spear skills will reduce the cooldown of your Spear 5, so you can spam it even faster. So when I talk about the specific effects on the other Spear skills, just know that they all reduce the cooldown of your Spear 5. Your auto attack will switch between Abyssal Strike and Fire depending on whether you're in melee or at range, and it will also inflict torment and vulnerability. The fact you can still hit your target while at range is an amazing feature and huge quality of life. Spear 2 Abyssal Force will inflict burning and chill on your target, and if you hit an enemy, massively reduce the cooldown of Spear 5. You want to use this skill as much as possible. Spear 3 Abyssal Blitz will let you dash in whatever direction you want and evade while doing so. It's great to use instead of a dodge to conserve endurance, and if you have some extra energy to spare. Spear 4 Abyssal Bolt is an AoE skill that will pull your targets together and inflict poison and chill. It's great to group up enemies before using your Spear 5 while they're all clustered together. In Karla, Break Razor's Bastion is a very nice heal skill and will pump out some serious healing to you and your team, as well as provide some resolution to reduce the amount of incoming condition damage. If you empower it by using another Karla skill beforehand, it will also grant some barrier. Razor's Claw's Rage is one of your most important skills, and will inflict bleeding on enemies as well as giving your allies the buff Razor Claw's Rage, which will cause them to inflict bleeding on enemies they attack. This bleeding scales off your condition damage and duration and actually counts towards your own overall DPS. So this is why whenever you hear people talk about Renegade damage benchmarks, they may refer to 2 numbers: with allies and without. This is because when you have allies around you, you'll deal even more damage because of how Razor Claw affects your team. When empowered, Razor's Claw's Rage will also inflict Torment. Given Torment is a key part of your damage, we always want to empower this skill whenever possible. Ice Razor's Ire will deal some strike damage, inflict a ton of vulnerability, immobilize enemies, and inflict Torment. Overall, it's just a great skill, and we'll typically want to use this skill first whenever we swap to Karla, so we can then buff Razor Claw's Rage. When this skill is empowered though, it will inflict chill on enemies. Not amazing, so we'll want to use this to buff something else typically. Dark Razor's Daring is an amazing CC skill that will grant you a little stability, give allies protection, and daze your targets. It's also a stun break for good measure. When empowered, it will also grant resistance to your team, which is a very nice buff. So whenever you want to CC a target, it's a good idea to quickly use your heal skill, which is very cheap in terms of energy, to buff Dark Razor's Daring for the extra boons. Not critical though if you're a bit low on energy, but just a nice to have. Soulcleave Summit is your upkeep skill while in Karla and costs 5 points in energy to maintain instead of the typical 6 that most Revenant upkeep skills need. The main benefit of this is that it's going to grant your allies lifesteal whenever they attack, which means it will keep them topped up as well as letting them deal extra damage. It's a very nice way to buff up your teammates' sustain and damage while letting you burn some extra energy, which is very useful for when it comes to triggering the trait Charge Miss. It's also a fire field for good measure, so you can use this to blast might if you are so inclined. In Malix, your main priority is going to be activating your elite skill Embrace the Darkness, which will pulse torment around you and pulse additional torment if you use a skill that costs energy. So really anything that is not an auto attack. Your heal, Empower, and Misery will simply heal more for each condition that you have. Pain Absorption is your stun break and will also grant yourself and allies resistance, which is great for ignoring things like fear on fights like Slothazor. It'll also transfer condies from allies to yourself though, so be careful. You do get some resolution for your troubles though. Banish Enchantment will apply chill and remove boons on your target. Boon Rip is always nice, so remember that you have access to this. Call to Anguish is a nice leap and AoE pull, which you can either use for mobility, to break Defiance bars, or simply group enemies together. In open world, it's quite fun to use Call to Anguish to group mobs together, hit them with Spear 5, use Spear 4 to group them together again, then hit them with another Spear 5. Such synergy. Heroic Command will refresh the duration of your Karla's Fervor and give your team 2 stacks of might for each stack. So typically you'll be able to pump out 10 stacks of might, which is a nice way to burn some extra energy while supporting your team. Citadel Bombardment will fire projectiles which inflict damage and burning. A fairly expensive skill, but incredibly satisfying to land. Fortunately, with the trait Charge Miss, we'll have some extra energy to spare so you can experience the glory of this skill. We won't be making much use of Orders from Above with the DPS build, but it will grant your team some alacrity. With the trait Righteous Rebel and some extra boon duration, at least 33%, you can turn this into a Condi Alack build, but we won't touch on that today. Not a bad skill to use though if you need to burn a ton of extra energy to trigger Charge Miss. For our traits, in Corruption, the traits Acolyte of Torment, Pact of Pain, and Diabolic Inferno are purely focused around letting us pump out as much condition damage and duration as possible. Overall, very simple. Invocation is all about giving us some extra damage modifiers, fury, and benefits whenever we swap legends. Rising Tide is a straight damage modifier. Spirit Boon will give you and your allies resolution and resistance whenever you swap between Karla and Malix. And Charge Miss is where the real value is at though. With this, when you swap legends below 10 energy, you'll start with an extra 25 energy instead of 50. This makes it possible to squeeze in more damaging or just plain useful skills into your energy budget, and it is a mainstay on a ton of Revenant builds. This is especially useful for using things like Citadel Bombardment and Dark Razor's Daring, which you otherwise wouldn't have the energy budget for. One useful swap I've found is taking Song of the Miss over Charge Miss, particularly on fights with shorter phases. You trade this extra energy for more damage and conditions whenever you swap legends. One of the downsides of Condi Renegade is that it takes a while for your damage to fully ramp up. This is an issue when the fight has super short phases and you just don't have time for your conditions to ramp. In this case, especially if you don't need the extra utility from things like Dark Razor's Daring, it can be worth it to sub in Song of the Miss over Charge Miss. Generally though, Charge Miss is the higher damaging choice. Everything in Renegade is all about pumping up your damage and condition damage. The Grandmaster trait Lasting Legacy will also increase the effectiveness and duration of your Karla's Fervor, so even more damage. Now for our rotation. First up, we'll start in Karla and use Ice Razor's Ire, Spear 5, then Razor Claw. This gives you the empowered Razor Claw for the extra torment and gets you below 10 energy to trigger Charge Miss. So blast through Ice Razor, Spear 5, Razor Claw, then Legend Swap to Malix. From here you can simply use your Spear 2 and 5 off cooldown and use Spear 4 once. This will leave you below 10 energy when it's time to swap back to Carla to trigger Charge Miss. Swap back to Carla whenever you're below 10 energy and use Ice Razor, Citadel Bombardment, then Razor Claw. Then simply use Spear 2 and 5 off cooldown and use Ice Razor one more time before you swap back to Malix. Rinse and repeat. If you're running Song of the Miss instead of Charge Miss, then simply skip Citadel Bombardment in Carla and Spear 4 in Malix. Everything else remains the same. With Spear, we have an incredibly simple and flexible rotation. It's amazingly easy to manage your energy, which has always been one of the more difficult parts about playing Renegade, and you have a range weapon so you can always be attacking your target. Combine that with what is currently a 53k DPS benchmark, and for the time being, you have what is objectively the best DPS build in Guild Wars 2. Now I hear you asking, isn't this just going to be nerfed? Almost certainly. Condi Renegade is doing way too much damage at the moment, and it completely eclipses all other DPS builds, on top of it being incredibly easy to play. We can probably expect this to be bopped on the head in the next round of balance changes, or at least when ArenaNet is done focusing on bug fixes for the new X-Pack. Now the good news is though, since the original Spear beta, Revenant Spear feels amazing to use. In a post talking about the feedback ArenaNet got from the beta, they mentioned that they were reducing the cast times of skills and making its damage ramp up even faster. Personally, I think they absolutely nailed that. Spear feels very fluid to use, the skills are snappy, and it's nice to have another Condi weapon to play with outside of Shortbow and Mace Axe. Now it's just a matter of tuning some of the numbers down on the Spear skills, and we'll be in a very good spot balance wise. Looking at the other DPS benchmark, with pre-Spear builds capping at around a 46k benchmark, I think if Condi Renegade ended up at around about 45k DPS, then that would be pretty ideal, or at least above 40k. One of the main drawbacks of this build is that it takes a long time to ramp up to its maximum damage. You can see my DPS numbers on the Golem just continuing to go up the entire time I'm fighting it. So on fights with short phases, you're simply not going to reach your maximum damage compared to some burstier classes. If this build got tuned down to a 45k benchmark, then I'd be absolutely ecstatic. Then we'd have a high damaging build that is ranged, simple to play, and comes with some trade-offs in terms of damage ramp up that would keep it reined in. So we'll keep an eye on what ArenaNet decides to do, and in the worst case, we always have the old Condi Renegade, which still absolutely slaps. And there we go everyone, everything you know to get started with what is easily the most broken build in all of Guild Wars 2. Not only is the damage absolutely insane, Renegade is easier to play than ever, and with the introduction of Spear, it's the most fun I've had with a build for quite a while now. Get in while the going's good and start blasting, team. Let me know in the comments below what other Spear builds you'd like me to cover, and if you want more Revenant build guides, I've put together a playlist of Revenant specific guides so you can pick your poison. And with that, I'll catch you all next time. Cheers.